Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the last and final part to Why Do You Care? Chio and Shota had a deal on no questions asked favors. Shota never questioned when she called in those favors, precisely because they were no questions asked favors. He had not asked why when she had asked him to break into a nondescript building to get a certain file out 3 years ago. He had not asked why, just 2 months ago, when she had entrusted a young woman to his care, to be escorted to the pier in the dead of the night, to be safely handed over to a woman who was waiting for her in a small boat. He had never asked for reasonings behind many seemingly weird things he had done on her behalf. But he had known the old woman long enough to know that whatever she had him do was for helping people in more unconventional ways, which is sometimes the only way help could be given to some people. Being an underground hero, Shota knew this better than anyone. He in return got in his favors in the form of medical assistance for many shady characters he dealt with as an underground hero. Many of his underground contacts often came to him with some form of injury for which they were either unwilling or unable to receive medical treatment from more legal means, not much unlike their current predicament. Shota already had a few favors racked up with Chio, but Okinawa was a big one, even by their standards. He mentioned it intentionally so that Chio would know how serious he was about this. The drive to UA was uncomfortably silent, and Shota was exceptionally aware of how warm and clammy Ghost's skin felt as he held the kid in his arms. He was careful not to aggravate the injury on the boy's side. The raggedy and short breaths the kid was gasping were not helping calm his worries. After having seen what he had in that abandoned building, Shota was no longer vigilantly watching Dobby. But from the corner of his eyes, he could still see worried turquoise eyes stealing glances at Ghost's pale and unconscious face from time to time. Izashi pulled up to the UA gates, and the gates opened, having automatically scanned their badges from a distance. Izashi continued until they reached the rarely used back entrance of the infirmary. Chio was already there, waiting for them as promised, the old woman's wrinkled face scrunched up in concern as Shota climbed out of the car, with an obviously young child in his arms. He watched her scrunched-up eyes widen when Dobby climbed out of the car right behind Shota. But to her credit, Chio said nothing but a quiet, "Follow me," as she turned around and walked into the infirmary. "Lay him down there." She pointed her syringe-shaped cane towards one of the empty cots once they were inside, and Shota laid Ghost down on the cot carefully. "He's got a 2-week-old stab wound, an infection, and a fever," Shota informed as he backed away, giving way for the healer to take a better look. She pulled the soiled bandages to the side, inspecting the injury, and frowned. "Oh dear," she muttered worriedly. "He obviously doesn't have enough stamina for me to heal him right away. I'll need to clean the wound and wait for the fever to go down before I can heal him." She looked towards the boy's wrists, which were still bound with quirk-canceling cuffs. "Let's take these off now," she started, but never got to finish her sentence. "No!" All 3 men shouted in unison, and Chio jumped, almost dropping her cane. She turned toward Shota with a questioning glance. "The cuffs stay on," Shota insisted with a firm tone. Chio held Shota's gaze for a few seconds before her eyes briefly flickered to Dobby, whom she obviously recognized, and towards the second set of cuffs on his wrists. The look she then leveled Shota with made him think that maybe, just maybe, their unspoken, no questions asked rule might not cut it this time. But Shota held Chio's gaze with an unwavering one of his own. The healer finally let out a sigh and turned back towards the table beside the bed and picked up a scissor and started to silently snip away at the bandages wrapped around Ghost's torso. Shota let out a quiet sigh and backed away, giving the woman space to do her job. The infirmary remained quiet for the next 20 minutes until she was done redressing the injury on the boy and hooked him up to an IV drip. She collected the soiled bandages and her equipment and walked off, but not before leveling Shota with another piercing glance. He ignored her, choosing to cross that bridge at another time. After she had walked into her office and closed the door behind her, Dobby quietly walked over to the side of the bed, pulled up a stool from the side, and sat down. He laid his hands over Ghost's hands, the 2 sets of cuffs giving out a quiet clink as they bumped together. There was no outwardly difference as Ghost continued to pull in labored breaths, but Shota knew that it would take some more time for whatever medicine Chio had administered to take effect. Time that they could use to get the answers that they had been promised. Shota walked to the other side of the bed, looking at the villain. "Talk," he commanded, his voice lacking the hostility it had held when he had addressed Dobby mere hours ago. Dobby kept his eyes on Ghost's sleeping face and stayed quiet. "What's going on? Who is Ghost running from? Who is he to you? I need answers, Dobby." Shota pushed. Dobby let out a sigh. His voice was almost a whisper when he finally spoke. "You've been running around with Izuku for a while now, right?" "For about a year, yeah," Shota answered. "Including tonight. How many quirks have you seen him use?" Shota's eyes widened. In the chaos that had taken place during the past few hours, he had completely and stupidly failed to realize that the unconscious kid lying on the bed before him had conjured up a friggin' tornado inside a room just a mere hour ago. The same kid who had used a paralyzing quirk on him a few weeks ago. And before that, Shota had been under the impression that he had a stealth quirk. Whatever way Shota could choose to answer Dobby's question, only one answer mattered. Too many. Ghost had used too many quirks than he should logically be able to use in Shota's presence. His stunned silence must have been enough of an answer because Dobby continued without being prompted. "Who else do you know that can use multiple quirks, Eraserhead?" That was enough to send Shota's spiraling mind into a sputtering halt. And as helpful as ever, it was Hisashi who uncharacteristically whispered out the damning answer. All for One. The monstrous villain that had battled with All Might in Kamino just last year. The boogeyman of the underworld, who had brought about the end of the era of the symbol of peace, while the whole of Japan watched it on live TV as it unfolded. Though he was defeated that day, it barely had felt like a victory when it came at the cost of Japan's #1 hero's career. "That's who Izuku is running from," Dobby answered. "He's running from his father." "What?" Dobby slightly flinched as both Hisashi and Shota shouted. "All for One is Ghost's father?" Hisashi asked in a stupefied tone. Dobby let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, both Izuku and I apparently won the championship, the World Shittiest Dad competition," Dobby said, his voice filled with sorrow. "Okay, hold up. Just back up. You can't just drop that on us out of the blue. You need to give us a bit more than that," Hisashi cried, a bit of the usual tone of his voice back. Dobby took a moment to brush a lock of damp green hair from Ghost's forehead before he spoke again. "I guess I'll have to start from the beginning." He brought his hands back to grasp Ghost's. "Apparently, Izuku's mom didn't know who or what his dad was when they got together. Izuku told me that she only learned the truth about All for One when he was 3 years old. Once she did, she took Izuku and ran. She skipped town, changed her name, and went into hiding." Dobby's voice was monotone as he kept talking. Shota and Hisashi chose to stay silent, letting him talk. "She managed to stay hidden for 9 years, but their luck ran out when Izuku was 12. All for One found Inko, but apparently she was a damn smart woman. She had contingencies drilled into Izuku's mind for years, safety measures to keep him safe in case All for One caught up to them. She managed to warn Izuku when she got caught, and he managed to get away. Just barely. That's how I found him. Under a bridge, all alone in the middle of a storm. A scrawny 12-year-old, with nothing but the clothes on his back." A tiny fond smile stretched Dobby's scarred lips. "He was fierce, though, almost feral. It took a lot to get him to trust me, but he eventually did. Trust me, that is." The look in Dobby's eyes held so much affection, which made Shota's head swim. He had to remind himself that this was a villain. But what he was seeing was making it difficult to stick to that reminder. "I decided to stick with him. I didn't want to leave a kid out in the streets like that. He reminded me a lot of me when I was a brat myself. Also, I knew it would only take very little for it to go horribly wrong in the streets, especially for a 12-year-old quirkless kid like Izuku." "Wait, what?" "What do you mean, quirkless?" Shota asked. "Didn't we just establish like 2 seconds ago that the kid had multiple quirks?" "I'll get there in a bit." Shota wanted to yank out his hair at Dobby's calm response. Oblivious to Shota's internal screaming, Dobby went on. "I stuck with Izuku. Since we were both running and hiding from someone, we decided that we'll hide together. They were both running. It wasn't easy, but we made do somehow. We moved around constantly, never staying in one place for long, always on the run. We continued like that for 2 years, and then our luck ran out. Shota sucked in a breath at the sudden darkness of Dobby's voice. All for One caught up, and Izuku was not quick enough to get away that time. He caught him. Dobby's voice was now a whisper. I tried to find him, but All for One was too well hidden. I kept trying for 4 months, not even coming close to finding him. When nothing worked, I did what I had to do to find Izuku. You joined the League, Hisashi breathed out. Shota was speechless. What could he say? As it turned out, he didn't have to say anything because Dobby continued on. That was my only lead into All for One. Dobby hung his head. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I would have warned the heroes of the summer camp attack, but I only learned about it on the same night. I was focusing on trying to find Izuku while pretending to be a part of the League, and Shigaraki literally sprang the attack on us the night of. I didn't have enough time to do anything but play along. Dobby kept his head down the whole time, still hanging onto Ghost's hands. But the kidnapping of that kid turned out to be the lead I needed to figure out All for One's location. When the kid was being held at the bar, All for One made contact, and I was able to trace it back to the lab. That was all I needed to find Izuku, but I couldn't leave that kid in Shigaraki's hands, so I tipped off the police at the hideout's location. You left the anonymous tip on the bar's location, Hisashi exclaimed, which made Dobby finally look up, with a sheepish smile on his lips. Well, I saw that creation girl stick a tracker on the Nomu, so I knew the heroes will have the lab's location, but they didn't know that the kid wasn't there. I may be an asshole, but I won't let another kid's life be the cost for saving Izuku's. He shrugged as if his statement made all the sense in the world, but for Shota and Hisashi, who had hated the scarred villain who had stolen their student from them a year ago, it definitely did not make sense. So I tipped off the police and snuck out of the bar. I used the attack on the lab as a distraction to sneak in. Managed to grab Izuku in the middle of the chaos. I knew as long as All for One was alive, Izuku would never be free. A mischievous smile stretched across Dobby's face. Or as long as Izuku was alive. Shota frowned. What do you mean? He asked. I managed to drag one of the more humanoid Nomu into the cell All for One was keeping Izuku in, and switched them. I made sure to burn the body just enough for it to be unrecognizable. Then I took Izuku and snuck out. The smile on Dobby's face melted as he turned back to look at Ghost once again. But by then, Izuku had been in the claws of All for One for 6 months, and the Izuku that came back, it wasn't the Izuku from before, he whispered out in a somber tone. Shota's heart sank. What do you mean? Hisashi asked the question that Shota wasn't sure he wanted to know the answers to. Regardless, Dobby answered dutifully. When Inko took Izuku and ran, he was still too small for his quirk to have manifested. And it never did even as he grew up. Both Inko and Izuku had thought that he was quirkless, but, as it turns out, All for One is more of a bastard than they had thought. As it turns out, Izuku did have a quirk. It was a mutated version of All for One's quirk. A more powerful version of it. I don't know the specifics because Izuku never explained. I couldn't bring myself to pressure him to talk about it. Apparently, All for One had done something to Izuku while he was still a baby to keep his quirk suppressed. Izuku told me that he had said that he wanted to nurture Izuku's quirk the way he wanted, but was hesitant of what Inko would do if he tried when Izuku was too young. Apparently, he wanted to turn Izuku into what Shigaraki is now, but he'd known that Inko would probably stand in his way if he had tried back then. He told Izuku that he had planned to take Izuku and disappear once he was a bit older. In some twisted sense, he had wanted to kill Izuku's mother. Dobby grimaced. Maybe he thought that it was love, he spat. The grand gesture of not killing the mother of his child, but instead stealing the child away from his mother as an act of twisted love. But Inko learned the truth before he could act on it, and she ran away with Izuku. That's why he'd been relentlessly looking for them for over a decade. Because he didn't want to lose his grand prize. Anger bloomed in Shota's heart. He already had plenty of reasons to hate All for One, but every word that was coming out of Dobby's mouth acted as fuel to burn his hatred towards the monster even brighter. Once he got Izuku back, he had undone whatever it was that he did to Izuku when he was a baby. And he forced Izuku to use his quirk on people. Forced him to steal quirks of people against his will. Over and over and over. A bloody tear dropped from Dobby's eye. Izuku never told me exactly what happened during those 6 months. Only the gist of what happened. And Dobby shook his head, as if words had failed him. He was a happy kid back then. Even if we were scraping by just barely on the streets, but the kid that I brought back from that lab was not Izuku. He didn't speak even a single word for weeks after that. No voice, no light in his eyes, just... I felt like I lost him, even though I managed to get him out. Shota's breath hitched. He couldn't imagine the child Dobby was describing. The ghost he'd known had always had a smile on his lips and a shine in his eyes. Did I tell you that he was a hero fanboy? Dobby's voice shook Shota out of his depressing thoughts. Huh? He was such a nerd. A ghost of a smile was back on Dobby's face. Before All For One, he used to rant hours on end about heroes and their quirks. He said that he'd wanted to be a hero when he was small, when he was too young to realize the whole running from the evil mastermind that was his father thing. He'd wanted to become a hero when he grew up. But what with him being in hiding coupled with the more pressing fact of growing up quirkless, he told me that he had abandoned that dream some time ago. Dobby reached to lightly stroke Ghost's cheek, wiping away a bit of grime stuck on it. Then he came back littered with a bunch of stolen quirks. He has never used his own quirk ever since, not even once, even up to today. He began to hate quirks. He hated his own quirk above anything else. He began to hate himself. I could see it in his eyes every passing day. All I could do was watch as the Izuku I knew was fading away. It was painful to watch, and I got desperate, so I hooked on to the one thing that even had a sliver of hope of bringing him back. His childhood dream of being a hero, or the version of that was possible for him to achieve. Hisashi gasped. "Vigilantism!" he exclaimed. "You were the one who told him to become one." Dobby let out a dry laugh. "Well, maybe not exactly in those words," he said in a slightly lighter tone. "But yeah, I merely suggested that he use what he now had to do what he always wanted to do. Be a hero. We were still in hiding, so he couldn't exactly go the legal way, so he settled on to the next best option. So yeah, vigilantism." The smile stretched farther on Dobby's face. The light returned to his eyes bit by bit. It was a slow process, but still better than what it was. Dobby then turned to look straight at Shota's face. "And then he met you." Shota blinked. Dobby held Shota's gaze with a look of gratitude. "A few days after he met you, he laughed. An actual real laugh for the first time since I brought him back from that cursed lab in Camino. And then he started smiling and laughing more and more every passing day. Slowly but surely he became the Izuku I knew. I was grateful to you, more than you could ever know, but there was no way for me to thank you without what happened in that alley happening, I guess." Dobby finally dropped his gaze from Shota's face. An uncomfortable silence stretched on. Hisashi looked at Shota with wide eyes and mouthed "what the fuck" with exaggerated lip movements. Shota wholeheartedly agreed. This was a whole fucking lot of information to process in such a short time. "I was going to leave." Shota turned back towards Dobby at the whispered words. "Izuku was happy whenever he was running around with you, and it was clear that you cared about him. He was no longer the 12-year-old scrawny, quirkless, helpless kid anymore. He didn't need me anymore. And on top of that, he had you. So I was going to leave. My mistake was trying to tell him. Thinking back, I should have just left without saying anything. Izuku didn't take it well. He said that he could explain things to you and get you to understand. He was adamant, even when I said no." Shota's eyes widened as he remembered how Ghost had mentioned how he wanted to tell something to him and Hisashi about his friend before they could meet him. How unexpected it had been and how utterly nervous the kid had been that night. "I told him it was a bad idea. I tried to tell him that I wouldn't mind leaving knowing that he had you, but..." Dobby let out a sigh and peeked back up at Shota. Well, you probably already know how stubborn he can be. I knew he wouldn't listen, so I decided to leave anyway. He'd be mad, sure, but it was the best choice for him and me. As it turns out, my luck was rotten that night because by some cosmic joke, that's the night that some jerk tried to jump me in an alley. I had to use my quirk and you saw the fire, and well, everything went to hell starting from that night, I guess. Dobby fell silent, dropping his gaze once again. Neither Shota nor Hisashi broke the silence. They didn't know how to. Once again, it was Dobby who broke the silence. He looked back up, turning so that he could look at both Hisashi and Shota, sitting up with his back straight. You have to promise me that you'll take care of him. Promise me that, and I'll willingly hand myself over. To the heroes, or the police, or the commission, I don't care. Dobby, Shota started, but Dobby cut him off quickly. Promise me, he insisted with a steely look in his eyes. Shota sighed. Fine, I promise. Dobby sagged as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, relief clear in his face, as if he had not been certain that Shota would agree to take care of the kid. Shota wasn't sure how to feel about that. Okay, he muttered. That's good. Thank you. So first things first, you're going to have to keep him hidden. Either that or change his name or something. Hisashi tilted his head in question. Why's that? All for One thinks he's dead. It's better to keep him thinking that. All for One is in Tartarus, Shota intoned. Dobby barked out a laugh. Do you remember what he said to Shigaraki back in Kamino? He spouted some bullshit about Shigaraki needing to learn on his own, finding his own way or some bullshit. Shota frowned. He couldn't see where Dobby was going with this. He wants a successor. His main plan was for Izuku to be that successor, but then Izuku died, or at least he thought he did, so now he's back to plan B, which is Shigaraki. Now he's trying to mold Shigaraki into a worthy successor, and to do so, he had to send him off to find his own way on his own. He'll bid his time until that time comes, not like he has to worry about time or anything like that. The man's practically immortal. But if he learns that his plan A is still somewhat viable, that Izuku's still alive, he'll do anything to get his grubby paws on Izuku again. Tell me, Eraserhead, you saw the destruction he wrought in Kamino. Do you really believe that Tartarus could hold him if he really wanted out? Shota's mind whirled. He'd seen the footage of the battle. He'd seen the aftermath of that battle. It didn't take Shota long to realize that, no, he did not believe that Tartarus would be enough to hold All for One, if he was really set on getting out. Okay, point taken, Shota admitted. Dobby nodded, satisfied at having made his point. Good. All Might's retired, and the new number 1 isn't even half the hero All Might was. He wouldn't even last a minute against someone like All for One. A strange sort of hatred coated the words the new number 1, as Dobby muttered them. So if there's going to be anyone who could possibly stand against him, that could only be Izuku. But he can't, not yet at least. Dobby's words were now coming a bit too fast for Shota to understand. So the best you could do is buy him time, as much as you possibly could. Enough time for him to get strong enough. Dobby. Next, he's going to be mad when he wakes up and finds out what I've done. You'll have to keep an eye on him. He tends to do stupid shit when he's mad, like really stupid shit. Dobby's words were coming even faster now, almost jumbling together. So you might want to delay telling him about me, handing myself over for a few days at least if you could. Dobby. You'll need to scrub our hideout. Not like anyone's actively looking for us, but doesn't hurt to be careful. I usually use those DNA scrub bombs I get off the black market. It's kind of loud, but it gets the job done. I think there were a few left at the hideout. You can use them, I guess. Dobby. Oh, they could be broken, since Izuku kind of tornadoed the room more than a few times over the past few days. Dobby. Maybe you can find some? What am I saying? Of course you can. You're a hero. You probably have better ones. Dobby. Shota tried again, but Dobby seemed to be trying to get all that he could out as fast as he could. Okay, what else? Oh, his favorite meal is katsudan. Sometimes bribing him with it works when he's being a brat. Oh, he likes onigiri too, but not the tuna mayo ones. He's allergic to tuna. Found that out the hard way. Toya. Dobby flinched hard at the name, eyes widening. His mouth smacked shut with a loud click. It took visible effort for him to open it again to speak so low that it was hard to hear. How did you... That's what Ghost called you, back at the hideout. Shota was glad that he remembered Ghost slurred words. He held his hand out towards Hisashi, and bless his better half for not needing words to understand what Shota needed from him. Izashi was quick to pull the keys to the cuffs and place them on Shota's waiting palm. Shota reached over to the bed and unlocked the cuffs on Dobby's wrists with a quick movement and pulled back just as quick. Dobby stayed frozen, blinking at his newly freed wrists in confusion. He stayed like that without moving a muscle for a while, before looking back up at Shota with confused eyes. Why? I don't have DNA scrub bombs. You're going to use yours. Shota did indeed have those, but Dobby didn't need to know that. If yours are broken, find new ones from the black market, like you said. Dobby simply blinked a few more times at Shota. You're letting me go? He asked slowly. Shota pulled up a chair from the side of the bed and lowered himself down. Yes. But why? Dobby still had not moved an inch from where he was holding Ghost's hands. Shota let out a long breath and shifted his gaze to look at the sleeping vigilante's face. Not many people know this, but I have a sister. We're not very close. We don't even talk to each other much outside of family gatherings and such. She's my polar opposite, an extrovert. She always has a stupid smile on her face, and she never, ever shuts up. Hizashi snorted, which Shota chose to ignore. We are as different as we could possibly be from each other, and yet... Shota looked away from Ghost and turned back towards Dobby, who was still staring at Shota with wide eyes. If it ever came to the point that she is in danger, and the only way to save her would be to pretend to join a supervillain, I'd like to think that I'd do it in a heartbeat. Dobby said nothing as he continued to watch Shota, and after a few seconds, he dropped his eyes. Shota could have sworn he saw shimmering tears in the turquoise eyes. Thank you, Dobby muttered quietly. Shota nodded, even though he knew Dobby couldn't see him, as he still had his head bowed down. Shota shifted on the chair to reach into a pocket in his utility belt and pulled out one of the disposable phones he always kept a few of. Here. He held it out to Dobby, who finally looked up. Do what you need to do at the hideout, and contact me if there's anything wrong. It's a school day, and you can't be here when school starts. Mike will sneak you out. I'll stay with Ghost, and we'll update you when he wakes up. Dobby slowly reached out to take the phone from Shota's hand. Will you be safe out there? Shota asked. He hadn't missed the part where Dobby had mentioned that both Ghost and him were hiding from someone. And something about them both having bad luck in their father department or something. You mentioned that you were also hiding from someone. Dobby offered Shota a small smile. Don't worry, Eraserhead. My monster's not nearly as bad as Izuku's. Shota nodded and looked at Hizashi. Hizashi gave him a smile. Well, we better get out of here before Chio comes back to kick us out herself. Let's go, Dobby, he said cheerily. Dobby gave a nod and finally got up. He reached up to run his fingers once through Ghost's hair and turned to follow behind Hizashi, who had already taken a few steps towards the door. Oh, and Dobby, Shota called out. Ghost isn't going to be able to bring you dinner, for a few more days at least, so you'll have to pick it up yourself. Hizashi usually has it packed and ready to go by 7:30. I believe you already know the way to the apartment. The look on Dobby's face was quite comical, that it almost made Shota snort. After a few seconds of opening and closing his mouth, Dobby seemed to settle on a nod. He turned back and walked out of the door, which Hizashi was holding open. You big softy, Hizashi whispered at Shota and winked before walking out and closing the door behind him. Shota hid his smile in the folds of his capture weapon and slumped against the chair, settling in for a long night. Izuku woke up slow and warm. That should have been enough warning for him to realize that something was wrong. The last few times he had woken up, he had been freezing and sweating at the same time. The discomfort he'd even gotten used to feeling all throughout his body was also gone. The surface he was lying on felt way more comfortable than what his flimsy mattress at the hideout should have felt like. By the time he'd woken up fully, he was panicking enough to jerk upright, gasping. Bright light, brighter than it should be at the hideout, made him snap them back immediately. You're awake for real this time? A painfully familiar voice asked from his side. Izuku whipped his head to the side, opening his eyes, disregarding the stab of pain that went through his head at the sudden bright light again. "Razor?" Izuku asked. His own voice was barely recognizable. It was rough and raspy, and the words scraped painfully against his throat as they came out. "Good morning, kid. Had a good nap?" he asked, reaching toward the bedside table, picking up a glass of water that had been sitting there. What's going—" "Drink this. You're dehydrated." The glass was pushed towards him instead of answers. Izuku's hands automatically reached towards the glass but stopped midway through. He frowned. "Why am I cuffed?" he wondered aloud. "For safety," Razor answered. "Yours as well as ours. But if you promise not to trash the room, I'll take them off." "Trash the room?" "Huh?" he asked instead. Razor let out a long sigh. "You look lucid enough now. I guess it's fine." He placed the water glass back on the side table and reached into one of the many pockets in his utility belt, pulling out a small key. He quietly inserted it into the cuffs, and they snapped open on both wrists. Izuku rubbed the reddened skin around them. Razor picked the glass back up and pushed it against Izuku's hands. "Drink," he ordered. Izuku's mind was still somewhat fuzzy. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sick, but seeing Razor sitting there felt wrong. He was sure that he was forgetting something important. However, the scratchy feeling in his throat was too painful for Izuku to prioritize anything other than the water inside the glass. So he silently took it from Razor's hand and greedily gulped it down. Now that was done. "Where am I?" he asked as the underground hero took the glass from his hands. "UA Infirmary." Izuku blinked. "How?" "I brought you here, after Dobby took me to you." Everything came crashing back. The night that he had almost told Razor about Toya, and all of it going to hell in the alleyway. How hard what the hero had told him hit him. The weeks he'd spent angry at Toya and avoiding any place that he might accidentally run into the hero. Running into him anyway, in an alley that the hero should not have been at. How Izuku had gotten more and more reckless in his nightly escapades after that encounter, and how that recklessness had resulted with a knife being buried in his side. Everything after that was fuzzy. He remembered bits and pieces of Toya leaning over him with fear and worry in his eyes. Him forcing pills and various liquids down Izuku's throat, glimpses of a room with winds whipping and furniture flying around. Through all of it, one thing that the hero had said took forefront of Izuku's mind. "Where is he?" Izuku hissed out, his mind already spinning to filter out all possible outcomes. He needed to know how long he'd been here. If it wasn't that long, there was still a chance that Toya was being held in a police station, or even at UA for the moment, before he could be transferred to a more secure facility. Izuku hoped he wasn't too late. On the chance that he was too late, he hoped that it wouldn't be Tartarus. "I let him go." Because if it was Tartarus, it was going to be hard. Breaking into Tartarus was going to be hard because he was in Tartarus, but it didn't matter because Izuku would still do it. He had to. He wouldn't let Toya... Wait. What? "What?" Izuku asked in a squeaky voice as his mind, which had been running several miles per hour, screeched to a stop. "I let him go," Razor repeated calmly. "He mentioned something about having to wipe the hideout, so I told him to go do that. Oh, that reminds me. I should drop him a text or something. I promised him I'd let him know when you woke up." Razor muttered as he rummaged through his pockets until he pulled out a phone. "You let him go?" Izuku asked carefully. He didn't understand. "Just like that?" Razor simply hummed an affirmation as he typed something on his phone. "But why?" Izuku pushed again. "The last time you said—" "The last time," Razor interrupted Izuku. "You seem to have skipped out more than a few key details, kid. I can't really fault you for all that, I guess. I didn't really react to it all that well, did I?" Razor shrugged. "But I have more intel now. Also, I'm calm enough to make more rational decisions." Izuku gulped, forcing his eyes to turn away from the underground hero's face, towards his own hands on his lap, twisting his fingers together. "So he He told you everything? Izuku asked in a small voice. Toya had to have. Otherwise, there was no way Razor would have ever let him leave. He did. The hero confirmed Izuku's fears. If it makes it any better, we didn't really give him much of a choice in the matter. It doesn't. Make it better, I mean. Still, I'm glad that I know now, Razor said nonchalantly, as if he's not worried at the slightest. Though I wish you had told me sooner. Izuku stayed silent. He wasn't sure what he could say to make it better. After a few seconds of silence, Razor let out a sigh. Look, kid, I'm sorry. It was more the hero's tone that made Izuku look up, and what he said. What for? He asked, tilting his head to the side. For what I said, back in that alley. Oh, that was enough to make Izuku drop his gaze again, looking back to his twisting fingers. It's okay, Razor. You were right. You have nothing to be sorry for, Izuku muttered. He hated that the memory still made his eyes sting. He shouldn't be feeling like this. He was stronger than this. I do, Razor replied in a firm tone. I should have handled it better. What I said back there. Well, they weren't lies, not really. I'm still not your father. The stinging was worse now. Although, Razor stayed silent long enough for Izuku to slowly lift his head, to peek at the hero. Now that I know what I know about your actual father, Razor more or less spat out the words. I don't think I want to be associated with that particular role when it comes to you. For some reason, it made sense to Izuku, but it still hurt, and he didn't know how to make it not hurt. But still, Razor went on, oblivious to the turmoil in Izuku's mind. I'm a teacher who takes in 20 new bratty kids every year, and I have to keep tolerating the said brats for at least a year. I've learned to accept that it's impossible to not care about them when you spend that much time together. Trust me, I've tried. Izuku almost snickered at the emotionally constipated look on the the teacher's face as he muttered the words. One way or another, you end up caring for them. Razor leveled Izuku with a look. I have very little choice in the matter when it comes to taking in 20 new hormonal teenagers, who I end up hating for a better part of the beginning of the year, but I still care about them. But you, despite my general reluctance to hanging out with hormonal teenagers, I chose to stick with you as long as I have, kid. That alone should tell you how much I care about you. Izuku was not strong enough to hold back the tears that escaped his eyes that time. He ducked his head again, hiding his face within the folds of his thick curls, rubbing his furiously leaking eyes. He kept at it for a few more seconds before he was able to look back up with, mostly, dry eyes. But I lied to you. For over a year. How can you not care about that? Izuku questioned. This still felt too good to be true. Extenuating circumstances. They happen time to time, and more often than not. Can't really be helped if this, he gestured towards Izuku's general direction, is not one of those extenuating circumstances. I don't know what else could be. Izuku sniffed again, as his vision became cloudy once more. Razor cleared his throat and looked to the side, avoiding Izuku's eyes. Izuku could understand this was way too much emotion for the usually stoic, grumpy hero to handle comfortably. Recovery Girl would probably keep you for observation for at least another day. You have no choice in the matter, by the way, he quickly added, barely letting Izuku open his mouth to protest. The old lady is scary when she wants to be, and I'm already on thin ice already, so you're staying and that's the end of it. Izuku clicked his mouth shut, and no, he was not pouting. Secondly, the tired hero continued, after knowing what I now know, I can't just let you go waltzing out of here after you're released. There's an empty room in our apartment, and you're going to be staying there. This is also not negotiable. This made Izuku's breath hitch. He knew that Razor cared about him, but still he couldn't allow himself to be caged, even if it was inside a cozy room. He needed to be out there on the streets. That was the only place that he felt useful. The only way he could repent. You can leave, of course. Razor must have seen the panic in his eyes because the hero was quick to continue. You're free to come and go as you please, as long as you promise to come back. And to come back safely. We're not trying to lock you up in a room, kid. We just want to make sure that you know that you have a place to come back to. Izuku blinked at the hero. It's non-negotiable, for you because you're a minor, and I have a responsibility to keep you safe. However, he stretched out the word, making Izuku draw in a breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, because it had to, because this was way too good to be true. The room is big enough for it to be shared by 2 people. Dobby is an adult, so I can't force him to live with us. But I'm guessing you might be able to do the convincing. No shoes were dropped. You'd let Toya stay too. Too good to be true. Way too good. He needs help, as much as you do, and I kind of have a feeling that you two are a package deal. It might fall slightly, under harboring a fugitive laws, but that's where having friends in the police force might come in handy. I'm positive we can work something out, preferably a bit far away from any possibly prying eyes. Keeping it under wraps. It would be hard, but not impossible. Neither would be getting you a new identity, maybe getting you enrolled in a high school. You should be in what? 2nd year by now? Izuku felt like floating. It had gone very wrong, very fast, just mere weeks ago, and he was having a hard time wrapping his head around how very right it was currently going. But why would you do this much? Izuku managed to stutter out. Razor let out a long sigh. I told you, kid. I care about you. And it's more than clear that you care about Dobby a lot. Is it that hard to believe that I want to help him too? After all, it's what heroes are supposed to do, isn't it? Help the ones that need it. Izuku had no answer for that, so he once again dropped his gaze towards his lap and offered a simple nod. Now that he had a little breathing space to just think, it really would be nice. Not having to be on the run. Just stop and try to be a normal teenager for once. The thought was appealing. He wasn't lucky enough to stay lost in the happy thought for much longer. He was suddenly snatched out of his train of thought from a voice coming from the other side of the closed infirmary door. I said that I was fine, shitty hair. A very familiar voice. Oh no. You're bleeding from your head, man. That most certainly is not fine. Razor. Izuku tried to warn the hero. The look on Izuku's face might have alerted him that something was wrong because he straightened up in his chair immediately, but he was still too late. The door banged open, and in walked 2 teenagers clad in what appeared to be hero gear. The one with the red spiky hair was holding onto the arm of the blonde with massive grenade gauntlets, who was aggressively pulling on the hold on his arm. The blonde's crimson eyes did a once-over of the med bay. They skipped over Izuku's figure on the bed before snapping right back, locking onto his face. Bakugo Katsuki's eyes widened in an almost comical way as he abruptly stopped pulling on the redhead's grasp. Izuku groaned and fell back on the bed, hitting the fluffy pillows hard and squeezing his eyes shut. He threw one of his arms over his eyes for good measure. One day, just one single day of peace is all I'm asking for. Is that seriously too much to ask? Izuku pulled his arm away, just enough to peek at Razor, who was looking back and forth between Izuku and the blonde, with a confused look. Well? He questioned the hero. I'm asking you. No. Razor's answer came out sounding more like a question. Fair enough. Eraserhead wasn't responsible for the utter shit show which was Izuku's life. He reluctantly pulled back the arm completely and sat back up, looking straight at the crimson eyes that he had not seen in 3 years. Deku? The blonde's voice was far quieter than how Izuku was used to hearing it. Well, he supposed it was to be expected. In Bakugo Katsuki's view, lying on the bed in front of him was the kid who he used to bully on a daily basis for years. The same kid who had simply gone missing one day without a trace. The same kid who'd been presumed dead for 3 years. It was fair that he was having what appeared to be an ongoing brain aneurysm. This was going to be a long conversation. Izuku let out a long-suffering sigh and spoke out loudly. Hey, Kachan. Long time no see. All right, listeners, this concludes the one-shot entitled Why Do You Care? Now, I don't believe there's any intention to continue this story, right? I kind of like the way the author sums it up, right? Like, I know that every story we listen to and that we read, despite the endings, most of the time we're still hoping for more, right? But I think it was really cool how the author finished this one up. So let me know your thoughts and reactions to this one. This whole last part is really well done. I love the fact that Dobby gets so much time in this fic, so many opportunities to talk and really just kind of air out what all was going on. We've got a whole dad for one situation and how that impacted Izuku's life and why Dobby joined the league. So I thought that was really well done as well. So please do let me know your thoughts and reactions. And I will always state this, if you have an opportunity to slide over to AO3, the links are in the descriptions of all the videos that I post on here, to leave comments and kudos and support to the original author. That's much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.